Okay, today we are back with some tasting history with Max. Right, that was his name? I'm already forgetting the name of his fucking channel, dude. My brain is shot. Anyways, since we are well into the World War II series and America has finally entered the war, I mean, we're not even a year into USA being inside of World War II yet, but cooking on the American home front during World War II, I do not have the time to make it. I really want to actually cook one of these meals sometime, but uh, I'm lazy. I will. I should not make this promise. There will be a day where I make something. When will it be? I do not know. Let's dive in.
World War II, most every country involved, Axis or allies, faced some.
God, I played that board game. I played that board game. It was a good board game. I don't know how well it's aged now, though. I'm not sure. I'd have to play it again.
Allies faced some sort of food rationing for its citizens on the home front. And this led to the advent of numerous interesting dishes, like this American recipe for emergency steak made with ground meat, milk, and Wheaties cereal. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we examine the American home front during World War II, this time on Tasting History. So this is going to be the first in a series of videos that I release over the next few months about the home front during World War II for various countries, and not just the Allied powers like the US, the UK, the Soviet Union, but also the Axis powers like Japan and Germany. But since I am from the
No Italy though, haha, suck it.
US, I figured I would start at home and have the first video be from America's point of view, even though we were kind of Johnny-come-latelys when it came to World War II. We didn't even enter the war until a few years after it started, and even then...
Well, 2 years, okay. 2 years, that's a little bit less than a few.
We didn't start rationing food until mid-1942.
Well, I mean, that is just a few months after entering, so, like, that's not crazy. Right? Did I hear him right?
And then we didn't start rationing food until mid-1942.
6 months into the war. Yeah, that's not bad.
It was in May of
Like, that's actually pretty quick. That's quicker than I personally would have thought. I thought maybe the U.S. would have been able to avoid rationing until 43.
1942 that the first ration card was distributed to all Americans, and this was...
Wait, hold on. Punishments ranging as high, let's see, as 10 years imprisonment or $10,000 fine or both may be imposed under United States statutes for violations thereof arising out of infractions of rationing orders and regulations. Damn, 10 grand and 42? What would that equal today? I don't know. Oh, wow. Book must not be transferred. It must be held and used only by or on behalf of the person whom it has been issued, and anyone presenting it thereby represents to the Office of Price Administration, agency of the U.S. government, that it is being so held and so used. For any misuse of this book, it may be taken from the holder by the office.
1942 that the first ration card was distributed to all Americans, and this was focused on rationing sugar.
Customer sugar card. This card is issued to protect our regular during the percent shortage, and around 1 pound of sugar each week. Oh, I see.
This was followed by coffee rationing later that year, which led people to brew Roosevelt coffee, which was just weak coffee made from reused grounds. And then came the rationing of meat, dairy, cooking oils, and a whole host of canned and processed foods. And as ingredients became more and more difficult to find, publishers put out recipes designed to make rationing more bearable. And one of the most iconic of these books was Betty Crocker's Your Share: How to Prepare Appetizing, Healthful Meals with Foods Available Today. The book, published in 1943, starts off with a section on stretching meat and cautions consumers to watch your P's and Q's, points and quantities. The points being a method of buying food. Different foods required different ration points, and we'll talk more about it later, but you had to spend these points in addition to spending money to get food. So it was all about conserving your points. The cookbook gives an example of
Okay.
1 pound of ground meat, which serves 4 or 5 people and costs 7 points, while the same weight of a porterhouse steak, which could only serve 2 or 3 people, would cost 12 points. So if you're running low on points, but you have a hankering for a steak, you're kind of out of luck unless you follow Betty Crocker's recipe for emergency steak. It calls for 1 pound of ground beef or hamburger, a half cup of milk, 1 cup Wheaties, 1 teaspoon salt, 1/2 teaspoon pepper, 1 tablespoon chopped onion. Place on pan,
I could literally make this. I just don't have the Wheaties.
pat into T-bone steak shape 1 inch thick, broil 8 to 15 minutes at 500 degrees, very hot. Turn
No shit.
once. Now, I have yet to try this emergency steak, and I kind of think that it's not going to actually taste like a real steak, but at least it only costs 7 ration points instead of 12, which a regular steak would cost. Though if you have no ration points, you can always make a ration point free meal from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh delivers farm-fresh ingredients right to your door, and to cut down on prep time, all of the ingredients are history at HelloFresh.com. Now, personally, one of my favorite breakfast items, just in general, is cereal, which oddly enough is an ingredient in this recipe for steak. Specifically, it calls for Wheaties cereal. And the reason is because Wheaties
Sugar?
was owned by General Mills. And
Oh, no. I was just gonna say that it has sugar in it. Well, no. What? There's a Pokemon plush in every. Oh, now I know to look for it. Would there be? I mean, sugar in Wheaties during ration. I don't know if Wheaties has sugar in it. I'm just thinking of modern American cereal, but shit. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the purpose of the Wheaties would be. Like, what is in Wheaties? Like, it can't just be for the crunch. You're not gonna do that for a freaking crunch. For a pie? No, it's just for a steak. Steak. Using beef or hamburger. A ration steak. But breadcrumbs and bulk out? I guess, but I don't know, that just still doesn't.
most of the
See.
recipes in this book use different products from General Mills because, as we've covered in a previous episode, Betty Crocker was basically just a character that was created to sell the products of General Mills.
American commercialism, baby. Yeah. Even during wartime and rationing.
Or originally the Washburn Crosby
USA.
Company. The thing is, since Wheaties are a flaked cereal, I'm thinking that just sticking them into this meat combo, it will lead to a very jagged steak. So I'm assuming that they are being used as a binder of some sort.
That's what I'm thinking.
So I'm going to go ahead and crush them up. Not super fine, but fairly fine. And then
I mean, yeah, because you're not using any. Because it's just. Because there was no egg listed in the recipe, and the egg would be like the binder, right? God, I hope I'm not making myself sound like an idiot when it comes to cooking. I don't know much, but I know some things, and I feel like I'm not wrong. Right? The egg has to be. Like, so there's no. But would there be egg in Wheaties? No, probably not. Right, it's just like wheat. It's just wheat. Wheaties. But there's gotta be something else in the Wheaties that I don't know cooking.
I don't think it really matters the order that you mix the ingredients, but the way that I did it was I took the pepper and salt and added it to the meat, and then I added the chopped onion and mixed all of that
I say as he's the better chef, and I am not a chef.
in, and then
I am just a dumbass.
added the Wheaties. Once everything was combined, I added the milk, and it took a minute or so of mixing, but eventually everything came together.
Did it? Are we sure?
And then, once everything is together, you come to the hard part, and that is sculpting this meat into the shape of a T-bone steak. So put the meat onto a baking sheet lined with foil. And you don't have to use aluminum foil. They wouldn't have used foil at that time because aluminum was scarce and there's a war on, don't you know? But I'm using foil because it's going to make it a lot easier later on. Then start to mold the meat into the shape of...
Oh, I do not like that texture. I mean, I hate touching raw meat, man. Especially raw chicken. Especially raw chicken, dude. Oh, but chicken is like the cheap meat now. Chicken is like the cheapest meat. So like it's cheaper than beef and ground turkey. Um, but touching raw chicken makes me gag every time. Let's see. Vintage cooking. Okay, so like what the hell is in 1940s Wheaties that would it be the binder? Would it be the binder?
a T-bone steak. I think I got pretty close, though I kind of wish I had like a real T-bone steak nearby to use as a model, but I think I did fine. What is most important is that you don't make it much
Oh yeah, the Pokemon plush is right there. Duh.
thicker than 1 inch. He says 1 inch.
Breadcrumb for the okay.
Because if it is much thicker, then the ground meat on the inside is not going to cook all the way, and that would be bad. But once your T-bone steak is ready, set it in the oven under the broiler at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, 260 Celsius, and let it broil for about 8 minutes. Then remove it from the oven and flip it. The issue here is this is not a real steak, so if you try to flip it like with a flipper of some sort or tongs, it will disintegrate. So the best way that I found to do it was to take another pan that was clean with foil, set it on top, and then flip both of them together, wearing gloves, flip both of them together, and then you flipped your steak.
Oh, it looks so unappetizing.
Then put that steak back under the broiler for another 8 minutes or so, or until the internal temperature.
I mean, it's got, right? Isn't this pretty much like a Salisbury steak? Is that what Salisbury steaks are? I have actually never had a Salisbury steak. I just know they're kind of roasted on the internet. Hold on, I'm looking it up. Salisbury steak. Let's see. These in ground beef patties, binders, and gravy. This is a Salisbury steak. It's just a Salisbury. Okay.
Reaches 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as we finish browning our emergency steak in the oven, let's take a closer look at what rationing in the U.S. was like during World War II.
I will say this is the one thing as an American that we've never had to experience rationing since.
On December 7th, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval fleet at Pearl Harbor. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan, and Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. The U.S. was now officially part of a conflict that had been raging in Europe for over 2 years and in Asia for over 4.
I wish I could do mid-Atlantic accent. I can't. I just can't.
And almost immediately, the Office of Price Administration, which had been established only months before the attack, set in to rationing certain items to the American public. Just a few days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the sale of tires was cut off. At that time, 75% of all the rubber in the U.S. was used to make car tires. But as a single battleship required over 75 tons of rubber, this meant tires on the home front were a luxury the U.S. could no longer afford. You were actually encouraged / ordered to save your 5 best tires and sell others to Uncle Sam.
Okay, so you keep 4 on the car and 1 spare? Who the fuck has more than that? Just, like, I only ever have the 4 tires on my car and then the spare, which the spare is not meant to be used for an extended period of time. It's just meant to get you, like, home or whatever until you can. I'm like, if you got yeah. I'm like, who the fuck would keep more? Well, I mean, I guess probably at that time period, it was more expected to have more tires laying around because the quality of tire was like less, you know? So I'm wondering if this rationing is what set the modern way of like how many tires everyone has. Like I don't like unless you're like a mechanic or a car guy, I don't know anyone that has more than 5 tires at a time for one car. Right? It's always the 4 on the car and then the spare in the trunk. Or if they're driving a gross ass Jeep, the spare on the back. Sorry, Jeeps, but you're ugly. Your cars are ugly.
But should you really need a tire, you could get one, but you had to apply and go through a long process just to be able to possibly purchase one. So it was all about conserving the tires that you did have. And this led to something known as the victory speed or war speed, which was basically a national speed limit of 35 miles an hour, which reduced wear and tear on the tires. Shortly after the tires became rationed, so too did bicycles and automobiles altogether. Any company that had been making these items instead turned to making military vehicles and munitions.
Hey, you imagine working at the factory and you were like just building a bike for Timmy the other day, and now you're building a tank for Timmy's older brother.
Gasoline too was being rationed, and people were encouraged to join car sharing clubs, basically carpools. One government poster from the time encouraged you to join one because when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler.
What? That is wild.
And these weren't really optional restrictions. Today, if you are caught speeding, you'll get a ticket. But then, if you're caught speeding, you could have your gasoline ration taken away entirely, so you can't drive at all. What's interesting is that the gasoline and other fuels like coal, while very important for the war effort, were not as precious as some other items because
the U.S. has a fucking ton of gasoline.
America produced plenty of oil and coal, so they could always just make more. But there were other commodities that were not produced at home, and so they were severely rationed. Things like rubber. Most of the rubber at the time came from Southeast Asia, and as soon as the war set in, the Japanese cut off that supply completely. Another ingredient that was like that was sugar, and that's why it was the first to be rationed, because most of the sugar that the U.S. was eating came from the Philippines. And so the only sugar that was grown at home was from places like...
I guess getting it from the Philippines would be cheaper, but I would figure the Caribbean was still... I would figure most global sugar production would have been still in the Caribbean at this time, right? I actually don't know.
Hawaii and Puerto Rico, and that was nowhere near enough to satisfy the needs of America.
Like Haiti, Dominican Republic. I don't know if Cuba ever really was a high sugar producer. Native sugars for continental U.S. Because it was the United States colony? Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I figured, but like I still figured because of the alliance with the UK and, you know, Monroe Doctrine shit or whatever, that during the war effort there would have been like, hey, we're all fighting the Nazis together. Let's like share sugar, or I don't know.
American sugar eaters. But not being able to import a certain item was just one reason that something might be rationed. There were other reasons, like the supply chain. It was very taxed at the time, and things like trucks and railroads were completely overrun transporting troops and war supplies from coast to coast. In addition, those troops being transported were usually young men who had been taken out of the workforce, so there was a huge labor shortage. And very quickly, many women stepped in to take those jobs, but it wasn't immediate, and it was kind of a game of...
Imagine having to work, like, on mechanics in a dress and heels, dude. What the fuck? No. Absolute.
catch up for quite some time. Then there was the issue of feeding those troops who were no longer producing food, because not only were they taking up food, but they also took up a lot of other items that were required to get the food to them in places like Europe, Africa, and Asia. Like a lot of their food was packaged in tin cans, but the US had almost no tin. And so foods like processed foods and canned goods became extremely scarce almost overnight. Stores put up signs letting people know how their stock had decreased over the year, and processed foods were often down around 80%. So to stop people from buying up all the canned goods and hoarding them, they too became rationed. Now, rationing something like sugar is very easy. You get 4.5 ounces per week. Simple as that. But rationing something like canned food is a little bit more difficult. First of all, it's all different sizes, and does a can of tomato soup equal the same as a can of green beans? What if you don't like tomato soup? It just became much more complicated. Luckily, Britain, who had been rationing for several years at this point, already had a system that the US could look at as a model, and that was the points system. Every person in the US, regardless of age, received an allotment of red and blue points.
Red and blue. Okay.
Red were used for meat, dairy, and fats, and blue were used for canned and bottled goods as well as baby food. Each week you had a certain amount of points that you could use, and you had to use those in conjunction with money to actually buy the product itself. So they also started putting price caps on pretty much every item in the country.
Wow, a price cap? Man, that's almost like a system we should implement a bit more in the United States.
The system was clunky and complex and confusing for many people, so the government started putting out these newsreels to kind of
the price caps really work? Whoa, who would have fucking thought?
Try to explain it. And one of my favorites has a narrator who sounds like a cartoon gangster from the 1940s. And it's funny because he even kind of admits that it's a terribly confusing system. And he says that in comparison, this makes filling out income taxes strictly for amateurs. And there were lots of people who now wish they hadn't played hooky when the teacher was giving out with addition and subtraction. But of course, if you don't figure right, you have nothing to chew on but fresh vegetables, which is hay strictly for citizens who chew their cuds, or maybe rabbits. And this is just one reason why people did not like the rationing system. But most people realized there is a war on, and I gotta do my part, and so they accepted rationing, even though they were always kind of grumbling about it. But in 1943, the government tried to explain how important it was, saying rationing is essentially democratic. It protects the little man who is unable to pay exorbitant prices for articles of which limited quantities exist. Basically, rationing was the only way to make it fair for everyone and to keep down what could be rampant inflation.
Man, I wonder if we had implemented that in 2020. But things could have been different. Whoa, a pandemic, and then we ration to ensure that the rich aren't hoarding? Whoa!
There were ways, though, to kind of get around some of the rationing rules, and that was simply to eat more foods that didn't require ration points, because not everything required points. Pretty much all fresh vegetables and fruits were never rationed. The canned versions were, because those were being sent overseas, but you can't really send like a fresh zucchini to Germany. It's just not gonna last. So fresh vegetables, have as many as you want. And that kind of went for most fresh foods. Fresh milk was
because they also do not. Fresh vegetables, they last 2 weeks at best.
Never rationed, though processed milk products like cheese or evaporated milk or butter, those were rationed. Though if you did ever want your cheese fix, you could eat Kraft macaroni and cheese because you could get 2 boxes for only 1 ration point. And for getting the most out of your butter, there were numerous recipes that would help you stretch what you had, like mixing butter with gelatin and
No.
milk, neither of which required ration points. One of the few
No, I am not stretching my butter with gelatin. Fuck off.
fresh foods that was rationed was meat, especially beef, which was one of the most costly items both in money and in points. And that's why there are so many recipes from this period for like mock meats. like the one that we're making today, the emergency steak, is using lesser quality meats to mimic a better cut of meat. And then there were recipes that just tried to kind of replace meat altogether, like one for baked peanuts, a meat alternative which included peanuts, tomatoes, and molasses that was baked in a dish. This wasn't so much to mimic the taste or texture of meat, nobody was pretending that it was, but it was meant to mimic the nutritional value that you would get if you were to eat a sirloin. But even those foods that were not rationed could still be very difficult to get. Like for the entirety of the war, eggs were incredibly hard to find. So you have a lot of recipes from this period for eggless cakes. Because of all these reasons, people started raising and growing their own food at home. People would raise chickens and rabbits, especially in the city.
Wabbits?
And if you had a little bit more space, a lot of people would have goats or pigs or even cattle. And then there was the...
You will never see me with a cow or a pig or a goat. I am not cleaning up their shit. Maybe a chicken. Maybe. For fresh eggs? Fuck yeah. If I had the land for it, hell yeah, and the money to afford to keep a chicken alive. So much shit. Shut up, multiocular. I want the fresh eggs. They shit so much. God damn it.
Victory Garden. Now, again,
Why is everything out of shit so much?
this is something that the US was able to look across the pond to Britain because the British had been building victory gardens for a while, though actually both in the US and in Britain they had done this back in World War I. But World War II really saw the victory garden come to life. The government put out calls for everyone who had a patch of dirt or even available space on their roof to begin gardening their own fruits and vegetables at home. And by May 1943, there were 12 million victory gardens growing in America's cities and another 6 million.
And let me guess. Once the war was over and rationing was over, American capitalism made sure all of those gardens disappeared.
On unused farmland. Eleanor Roosevelt even planted one on the White House lawn. Cities converted parks to be community-run victory gardens, like the lawns of Riverside Park in New York City, the Boston Common, and portions of Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And in an era before you could just watch a YouTube video if you wanted to learn how to grow a green bean, they would put out books like the ABC of Victory Gardens to teach us city dwellers how best to turn your backyard into an instrument of war. And I say that because that is how the government sold these gardens, as an instrument of war. A victory garden is like a share in an airplane factory. It helps win the
wild comparison.
war, and it pays dividends too. By 1944, victory gardens were producing about as many fruits and vegetables as the commercial farms of the country.
And I wonder why those stopped existing after the war.
Which is pretty darn impressive. What I found interesting is that there wouldn't have actually been such a need for these victory gardens had the government not kind of shot themselves in the foot right from the get-go. See, the vast majority of certain fruits and vegetables were being grown in California, Oregon, and Washington state, and many of the farms were owned by Japanese Americans. For instance, a full half of the tomatoes and 95% of snap peas were grown just by Japanese American farms. And so when FDR signed Executive Order 9066 and sent many of those same growers to inland internment camps, over 6,100 farms were taken, but many lay fallow due to a lack of labor. But since those who had been sent to those camps knew so much about farming, the victory gardens that they set up at these Japanese internment camps turned out to be some of the most productive
Racism doesn't make sense.
in the entire country. And I would actually love
There is no fucking logic.
to to do a whole video just on what they ate at these Japanese internment camps. So if that's something that you would be interested in, let me know, and I'll make it into a video. Now, while most Americans were growing their own fruits and vegetables, raising livestock, and accepting the nature...
By the way, my family's German American. Like, got a farm around this time period. They weren't ever put in internment camps.
...of rationing with as much dignity as they could muster, there were, of course, some who thought that they were above the rules and didn't play fair, and this led to a thriving black market. This usually took the form of a consumer overpaying the monetary value of a certain product and not giving the grocer or whoever it was any ration stamps. You know, a little under the table. I'll pay you double, but no stamps. Unfortunately, the person who was taking this money had to turn in those stamps if they wanted to keep being resupplied, and so this led to counterfeit stamps, stealing different stamps, or they would have to ask other people who didn't use all of their stamps to give them theirs, and that's why the government said that any unused stamps that you have at a certain end of a period, you should destroy. Now, there was, of course, a social stigma against this. You know, why should I have to play by the rules if you're not? But since everyone kind of hated rationing, it wasn't that uncommon. They say that a full 17% of the meat that was being sold in the US at the time was being sold via the black market. And these people who were doing this were not called bootleggers like they were during Prohibition, but meatleggers. And they were put on the same plane as spies and saboteurs. There isn't any great difference. They're all helping the enemy. But I assure you, I am no meatlegger. I purchased my ground beef on the up and up. The ground beef that I am using to make my emergency steak, which should be ready to eat. And here we are, emergency steak from the World War II home front. I mean, it kind of looks like a steak. Kind of, if you don't look too closely, you squint.
Close your eyes.
Pretty cool, actually. And it smells good. Smells like meatloaf. Pretty sure it's gonna taste like meatloaf because...
Yeah, you're using breadcrumbs. Yeah, it's pretty much just a fucking meatloaf. It's just a thin meatloaf.
Looking back, it's kind of a lot like meatloaf. Here we go.
I mean, meatloaf sometimes usually has egg in it, I think. Yeah, it's pretty much just meatloaf. Salisbury steak without the gravy.
That is pleasantly delightful. It does kind of taste like meatloaf, but a little bit different. I was thinking that it wasn't going to have a lot of flavor because there isn't a lot of spice or anything in there, but it actually has a really good amount of flavor. Maybe the Wheaties really add something. I mean, I think you could put like a sauce with it, but I don't think you really need it. It's really good as is. Emergency steak. Very nice. Now, the rationing of meat pretty much ended with the end of the war, I think shortly thereafter, and most of the rationing ended at the end of the war or shortly thereafter. But there was one ingredient that was rationed all the way until 1947, and it was the ingredient that had been the very first to be rationed, and that is sugar. So pretty crazy that it was still being rationed 2 years after the end of the war. But that is nothing...
Well, I mean, United States troops are still stationed pretty everywhere, so I guess that makes sense.
In comparison with what Great Britain had to go through, they were still rationing certain ingredients, meat being one of them, until 1954.
Yo, fuck that.
9 years after the end of the war.
That's like someone born in 39 wouldn't, if you were born in Britain in 1939 and you weren't killed in any of the bombings, you wouldn't have had non-ration foods until you were 15 or 16. No, wait, hold on. No, my math is wrong. Until you were like, no, 14. I'm doing math weird here. 14 years of rationing. No, okay. So just can't do math. Okay, so Britain starts rationing in 1940. 1954 is when it ends. Okay, so yeah, you would have been 14 years old is when you would have had your first non-rationed meal. 14, 15. That's crazy. That's crazy to me.
So America had it pretty good in comparison. But I will touch on England and or Great Britain and how they dealt with the home front and rationing and living on the home front because they were actually part of the war, Battle of Britain, all that rot. So probably won't be the next.
All right, I was cooking on the American home front during World War II with tasting history. I I think he could have done. I think he could have done something different with this. I think it should have been a full meal, like a full dinner plate. 'Cause I'm sure there are some Americans that definitely only had that as their like that would be their whole meal. Whether or not that's the average American, I do not know. I do not know the economics, but I think I think he should have made more than just the the meat steak. I mean, all steak is meat. The beef, the cooked beef shaped like a steak. I think it should have been a full meal, not just the meat itself. Um, I mean, other than that, yeah, a video. Except it kind of uh I don't know. I kind of want more of a focus on the cooking instead of the history. Like he does a great job with the history. I'm kind of here because he knows how to cook food good. He knows how to cook food. He understands cooking. That's kind of what I'm here for. But anyways, next episode, next video.